I stood on the median at 6:03 in the morning, praying the light stayed red long enough to make rent. A black town car stopped, and an old man bought my wilting carnations with crisp $100 bills, slipping me a receipt with a forbidden surname. 3 weeks later, that same man stood on a witness stand freezing every account my parents possessed, and I finally realized my so-called crazy was the most profitable story they had ever told. My name is Chloe Collins. If you had asked me who I was 6 months ago, I would have handed you a linen-textured business card with Monroe photography embossed in gold foil and told you about my natural light studio downtown. I would have told you about the weddings I was booked for in June and the editorial spread I was editing for a local lifestyle magazine. But on that Tuesday morning in early November, standing on the median strip at the intersection of Ridgeway and Dalton, I was nobody. I was just a shivering shape in a gray hoodie, trying to make myself small enough to disappear, but large enough to be seen by drivers with loose change. Dawn in Bayfield Crossings does not break. It bruises. The sky over the Eastern Industrial Park turned the color of an old bruise, purple and yellow and sick, highlighting the exhaust fumes rising from the idling sedans and delivery trucks. The air tasted like wet asphalt and diesel, a metallic tang that coated the back of my throat and mixed with the sour, acidic bite of the gas station coffee I had bought with the loose dimes found under my car seat. My toes were numb inside my canvas sneakers, damp from the morning mist that clung to everything in this city like a second, unwanted skin. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, clutching a plastic bucket handle in one hand and a bundle of 3 wilting carnations in the other. My internal clock was ticking louder than the traffic light. It was 6:14 in the morning. The rush hour wave was building. I had exactly 3 hours before the sun got high enough to expose just how sad these flowers really were, and maybe 4 hours before the city ordinance officers started their patrol loop. My internal mantra had become a rhythmic, desperate drumbeat. Just sell enough bouquets so they don't throw your stuff on the sidewalk today. Just sell enough. Just $10. Just $20. I needed $24 to refill the tank of my Honda Civic. That car was currently parked 3 blocks away, hidden behind a dumpster at a construction site, stuffed with every piece of clothing and camera gear I owned. It was no longer just a vehicle. It was my bedroom, my closet, and my fortress. The landlord had taped the orange eviction notice to my apartment door 2 days ago. I hadn't gone back since. I couldn't bear the thought of turning the key and finding the lock changed, or worse, running into him in the hallway and having to explain why a 26-year-old woman with a college degree and a pastoral family background couldn't scrape together $800. I looked down at the flowers in my hand. They were pathetic things, purchased wholesale from a warehouse distro center that usually supplied funeral homes. The petals were fraying at the edges, a tired pink that looked gray in the exhaust-filled light. I was selling them for $5 a bunch. If I sold 5 bunches, I could eat a hot meal and keep the car heater running tonight. A silver SUV pulled up to the red light. I stepped forward, plastering on a smile that felt like it was cracking my dry lips. The driver, a woman in her 40s with a sleek bob and a headset, didn't even look at me. She stared straight ahead, her window sealed tight, her world climate-controlled and safe. I stepped back, the rejection stinging more than the cold. It wasn't the poverty that broke me. It was the visibility of it. Every time a car rolled up, my heart hammered against my ribs. Bayfield Crossings is a mid-sized city, big enough to be anonymous until you need it to be, but small enough that everyone knows someone. I had spent 4 years building a reputation here. I had photographed half the engagement shoots for the suburban crowd in Maple Crest Grove. What if the woman in that SUV was a potential client? What if the man in the truck behind her was someone who followed my photography account on social media? I pulled my hood lower, terrifyingly aware of how I must look. No makeup, dark circles under my eyes carved by nights of sleeping upright in a driver's seat. Hair shoved into a messy bun that wasn't a style choice but a hygiene necessity. I avoided eye contact, scanning license plates instead of faces. Please don't let it be anyone from New Dawn Fellowship. Please don't let it be anyone who knows my mother. The light turned green. The traffic surged forward, a river of steel and indifference. I retreated to the concrete strip, counting the seconds until the next read. 6:22. Bank balance $9.42. That was when the black town car glided toward the intersection. It stood out immediately, in a sea of rusted pickups, commuter sedans, and delivery vans. This car was a shark swimming among minnows. It was a deep, glossy black, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the gritty streetlights. The windows were tinted dark, hiding the interior completely. It didn't jerk to a stop like the others. It came to a rest with a smooth, hydraulic hush, positioning itself perfectly alongside where I stood. I hesitated. Cars like this didn't buy $5 flowers from girls on medians. Cars like this usually belonged to the executives who worked in the glass towers downtown, the ones who had assistants to buy their roses. The rear window hummed. It lowered slowly, revealing the interior inch by inch. I smelled leather and expensive climate control before I saw the man. He was old. That was my first impression. But not the frail, kindly old that invites you to sit on a porch. He was made of granite and steel wire. He wore a worn tweed coat that looked like it had survived decades of winters. But beneath it, I caught the glimpse of a suit jacket charcoal. Immaculate. Obviously custom-tailored. He had a face you usually see on bank walls or charity plaques stern, lined with a history of difficult decisions, with eyes that were a piercing, unsettling blue. He didn't look at the flowers. He looked at me. He studied my face with a terrifying intensity, scanning my features as if he were cross-referencing them against a file in his mind. He looked at my chin, my cheekbones, the way I held my shoulders. I bristled, my grip tightening on the carnations. I knew this look. I had seen it from older men before. It was usually followed by a patronizing comment or an offer that wasn't really about flowers. It was the look of a savior complex, someone who wanted to buy a moment of feeling benevolent for the price of a cup of coffee. "How much, he asked. His voice was gravel and low, barely carrying over the noise of the idling truck in the next lane. $5 a bunch, I said, my voice raspy. I cleared my throat. 3 for $12. He didn't break eye contact. I will take them all, I blinked. All of them I have. I have about 20 bunches in the bucket. I said all of them, he repeated. There was no impatience in his tone, just a factual statement of reality. I scrambled to gather the flowers, my hands shaking slightly. The light was going to change soon. I grabbed the bundles, water dripping from the stems onto my jeans, and awkwardly thrust them toward the open window. He didn't reach for the flowers immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a money clip that glinted silver. He peeled off bills. 1, 2, 3, 4. He pressed a thick fold of paper into my damp palm. I looked down. They were hundreds. Crisp, blue-faced $100 bills. 4 of them. $400. Sir, I can't. I don't have change, I stammered, panic rising. This is way too much. The total is only... Keep the change, he said. He took the massive armful of wilting carnations with a care they didn't deserve, setting them on the pristine leather seat beside him. Then, before I could pull my hand away, he reached into his breast pocket again. This time, he didn't pull out money. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt thermal paper, crinkled, with the logo of a gas station on the back. He slid it into my hand, pressing it on top of the money. Read the name, he commanded softly. I frowned, looking down at the receipt. It wasn't a receipt for gas. It was a credit card slip from a diner, signed in a jagged, forceful hand. Rowan Kingsley. The breath left my lungs as if I had been punched. Kingsley. The name echoed from the deepest, darkest corners of my childhood. It was a name my mother, Sandra, had spat out with venom across the dinner table for as long as I could remember. The traitor. The man who abandoned us. The reason we have to struggle for the Lord while he sits on a throne of steel. My grandfather. The industrialist, who had supposedly cut off his own daughter because she chose faith over family money, or at least, that was the story Sandra and my stepfather Caleb had drilled into us. I looked up at him, my eyes wide, searching his face for the monster I had been warned about. I saw only the sharp, discerning gaze of a man who missed nothing. I whispered. He didn't smile. He leaned forward slightly, the window motor engaging to roll up the glass. "Never sell your story for less than it cost you to live it," he said. The words were spoken idly, almost casually, as if he were commenting on the weather, but they carried the weight of a verdict. "Paper keeps score better than tears. Chloe," he knew my name. "Wait." I stepped forward, but the light turned green. Horns blasted behind him. "Check the math," he said, his voice fading as the glass rose. "And get off this corner." The black car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the morning traffic, leaving me standing in a cloud of exhaust with $400 and a gas station receipt clutched in my fist. I stood there for a long time, ignoring the honking cars and the light cycling from green to red and back again. I looked at the receipt again. Rowan Kingsley. 3 weeks later, that same old man stood in a courtroom, his signature freezing every account my parents had ever touched. He didn't look at me then, either. He looked straight at the judge. "My name is Chloe Collins, and this is how selling flowers at an intersection turned into the most expensive revenge case Bayfield Crossings has ever seen. To understand how I ended up on that median strip, begging strangers for gas money, you have to go back 3 weeks. You have to go back to the morning I was still Chloe Collins, the rising photographer, and not Chloe Collins, the cautionary tale. It started with a vibration. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, a harsh, insect-like sound that drilled into my sleep. Then it buzzed again, and again, a relentless staccato rhythm that pulled me out of a dream about a beach wedding shoot. I rolled over, squinting at the screen. The digital clock read 6:15 in the morning. The notifications were stacked in a terrifying vertical list, all from the Northlock Community Bank app. Withdrawal ATM Maple Crest, $500. Withdrawal ATM, Maple Crest, $500. Purchase Luxe Luggage, Leather, $840. Purchase Sanctuary Springs Spa, $350. Purchase Gems of Bayfield, $4,250. I sat up, the blood draining from my head so fast I felt dizzy. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. I unlocked the phone and opened the banking app. The loading wheel spun for an agonizing 5 seconds, and then the number hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My balance was usually around $12,000. It was the Monroe Studio Fund, money I had scraped together over 4 years of shooting 7 weddings a season, editing until 3 in the morning, and eating instant oatmeal so I could afford professional lenses. It was my down payment for a permanent studio space. It was my safety net. It was my future. The balance on the screen read $8.14. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, sealed tight by a panic so absolute it felt like drowning. I dialed the fraud support number on the back of my card, my fingers clumsy and cold. The hold music was a cheerful, synthesized jazz loop that mocked the pounding of my heart. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the duvet, staring at the dust motes dancing in the morning light, waiting for someone to tell me this was a glitch, a mistake, a server error. When the representative finally answered, his voice was flat, bored, the voice of a man who had already had this conversation 20 times that morning. I explained the situation, my words tumbling over each other. I told him about the $12,000. I told him I was asleep. I told him I didn't buy luggage or jewelry. I heard the clicking of keys on his end. "Ma'am," he said, and the tone of his voice shifted from bored to dismissive. "I am looking at these transactions. The ATM withdrawals and the point-of-sale purchases were all made card present." "I don't know what that means," I whispered. "I still have my card." "It means the physical chip was inserted," he droned. "And more importantly, the correct 4-digit PIN was entered on the first attempt for every single transaction. When the chip is present and the PIN is verified, the bank considers that an authorized transaction." "But I didn't authorize it," I said, my voice rising to a shrill pitch I didn't recognize. I am telling you, that is my life savings. If you gave your card and PIN to a family member or friend, that is a civil dispute, not bank fraud, he recited, clearly reading from a script. We cannot issue a provisional credit for authorized use. I didn't give it to anyone, I shouted at the empty room. But as the silence stretched on the line, a cold, sick realization settled in my stomach. The PIN, 0824, my birthday. It was stupid, I knew, but I had never changed it. And there were only 2 people in the world aside from me who had ever seen me type it into a keypad. I flashed back to 6 months ago, an urgent care clinic. I had sprained my wrist hauling gear at a reception. My stepfather, Caleb Riker, had driven me because I couldn't steer. My mother, Sandra, had been hovering nervously. When it came time to pay the copay, my left hand was swollen and useless in a splint. Caleb had taken my card from my wallet. "Let me help you with that, Chloe," he had said, his voice smooth and pastoral. He had inserted the chip. I had leaned over and typed the code with my right hand, but he was standing right there, watching, his eyes resting on the keypad. Sandra had been watching too, her sharp eyes missing nothing. I dropped the phone on the bed and scrambled off the mattress. I grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, dumping the contents onto the floor. Lipstick, lens caps, receipts, gum wrappers. I grabbed my wallet. It was a battered leather thing I had bought at a thrift store. I flipped it open. The slot where my blue Northlock debit card lived was empty. My mind raced backward, frantic, tearing through the last few days. When was the last time I saw it? Thursday night. Sandra had come over. She had been crying, a performance of weeping that shook her narrow shoulders. She had sat on my couch and told me about a lapse in their homeowner's insurance, a clerical error, she said, that required an immediate payment they didn't have liquid cash for until Caleb's stipend cleared on Monday. She had asked for a glass of water. I had gone to the kitchen. My purse had been sitting on the coffee table. I sank to my knees on the cheap laminate floor of my apartment. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a stranger in a dark room in another country. I printed the transaction list on my inkjet printer, watching the pages slide out with a sense of unreality. Sanctuary Springs Spa, Gems of Bayfield. These weren't urgent insurance payments. These were luxuries. I got dressed in 3 minutes, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie my shoes. I grabbed my camera bag. I never went anywhere without it. A habit born of paranoia that my gear would be stolen if I left it alone and the stack of papers. I got into my car and drove. The drive to Maple Crest Grove usually took 30 minutes. I made it in 20. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I was still bargaining with the universe. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Sandra had borrowed it for the insurance and then accidentally bought jewelry. It didn't make sense, but the alternative that my mother and the assistant pastor of New Dawn Fellowship had systematically drained my account while I slept was too monstrous to accept. Maple Crest Grove was quiet. It was a neighborhood of manicured lawns and respectable silence, the kind of place where people put flags on their porches and judge you for leaving your trash cans out too long. I pulled into the driveway of the 2-story colonial house where I had spent my teenage years walking on eggshells. Caleb's pristine sedan was in the driveway. I didn't knock. I used the spare key hidden under the ceramic frog on the porch, my movements jerky and aggressive. The house smelled of vanilla and expensive roasted coffee beans. It was a warm, inviting smell that clashed violently with the cold dread in my gut. I walked down the hallway to the kitchen/dining area. They were eating breakfast. It looked like a scene from a catalog. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the table set with new crystal stemware I had never seen before. There was a platter of pastries, a heavy silver pot of coffee, and a vase of fresh lilies. Caleb was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a crisp polo shirt, reading a glossy brochure. I could see the title upside down: San Aurelio, a mission of spirit and leisure. Sandra was buttering a piece of toast. When she saw me, her hand froze. "Chloe," she said, her voice pitching up into that breathless, fragile tone she used when she was cornered. We weren't expecting you. Is everything okay? I walked to the table and slammed the stack of bank statements down next to the pastry platter. The crystal glasses rattled. Where is it? I demanded. My voice sounded raw, unrecognizable. Where is what, honey? Caleb asked, looking up from his brochure. He took off his reading glasses, his expression the picture of calm, pastoral concern. You look upset. My debit card, I said. The one you stole from my wallet when you were crying about insurance on Thursday. The one you used to drain $12,000 from my studio fund, Sandra gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Stole, Chloe. That is a terrible word. That is a sinful word to use against your mother. I ignored her and looked around the room. My eyes landed on Sandra's purse, a designer tote, structured leather, brand new, sitting on the counter. I lunged for it. Chloe, stop that! Sandra shrieked, scraping her chair back. I upended the purse onto the granite island. A cascade of items fell out. A heavy leather wallet, a tube of lipstick, and there, sliding out from a side pocket, was my blue Northlock debit card. Right next to it was a crumpled receipt. I snatched it up. Gems of Bayfield. Item Heritage Chronograph Watch. Total $4,250. I stared at the receipt. I knew that watch. I had photographed it for a catalog gig 6 months ago. It was a status symbol, a heavy, gold-faced piece that screamed old money. I turned to them, holding up the card and the receipt. I was shaking, vibrating with a rage so hot it felt like fever. You bought a watch. You told me you needed insurance money, and you bought a $4,000 watch with my savings. Sandra burst into tears. It was instantaneous. One moment she was indignant, the next she was sobbing, her face buried in her hands. We needed it for the ministry image. Chloe, you don't understand the pressure on Caleb. He has to look the part. He meets with donors. He meets with city leaders. We were borrowing it. Borrowing without asking is stealing. I screamed. And you didn't borrow $50. You took everything. You took 4 years of my life. You're being so selfish, Sandra wailed, looking up through her tears. Her face was red, twisted into a mask of victimhood. You sit on that money. You hoard it. $12,000 just sitting there while your family struggles to do God's work. While we try to build a future, we raised you. Chloe, we sacrificed for you, and now you begrudge us a little help. A little help, I choked out. You went to a spa. I saw the transaction. $350 at Sanctuary Springs. Is a facial part of God's work. Mom. I needed to decompress, she shouted, her voice hardening. The stress you cause me. The worry I deserve to feel human. I looked at Caleb. He hadn't moved. He was sipping his coffee, watching me over the rim of the cup. He was the calm center of the storm, and that was far more terrifying than Sandra's histrionics. Give me the money back, I said, turning to him. Transfer it back right now, or I'm calling the police. I have the proof. I have the receipt. Caleb set his cup down on the saucer with a gentle clink. He folded his hands on the table. Chloe, he said softly, you aren't going to call the police. Watch me, I said, reaching for my phone. If you call the police, Caleb said, his voice level and conversational, I will have to make a few calls of my own. I believe your biggest contract is with Iron Birch Collective. Isn't it the lifestyle brand? I froze. Iron Birch was 70% of my income. I was on a retainer with them. They were a family values, wholesome living brand. They didn't hire drama. I know the director there, Caleb continued, picking a crumb off the tablecloth. He attends the Tuesday prayer breakfast. If the police show up here, if you make a scene and file a report against your own parents, I will have to call him. I will have to tell him, with a heavy heart, that our daughter is going through a severe mental health crisis, that she is unstable, that she is making wild accusations against her family because she is off her medication. I'm not on medication, I whispered. He doesn't know that. Caleb smiled, a tight, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. And who is he going to believe, the respected assistant pastor of New Dawn Fellowship, or the freelance photographer who screams at her mother, My blood ran cold. He wasn't just threatening me, he was explaining the architecture of a cage he had already built. "You would destroy my career," I asked, my voice barely audible, "to keep my money." "We are protecting the family," Caleb corrected. "And if you force my hand, Chloe, your income will be the collateral damage. You can have your little police report, which will go nowhere because it is a civil dispute between family members, and in exchange, you will lose your contract, your reputation, and your standing in this town, or you can walk out that door. Let us use the resources God provided through you, and perhaps we can discuss a payment plan when the mission trip funds come in next year." I looked at Sandra. She had stopped crying. She was watching Caleb with adoration, as if he had just delivered a sermon. I looked down at the receipt in my hand, $4,250. I realized then that there was no misunderstanding. There was no mistake. I had walked into a robbery. But the weapon wasn't a gun. It was my own history. It was the fact that I was their daughter. "You're monsters," I said. "We're your parents," Caleb said, returning to his brochure on San Aurelio. "Close the door on your way out." I walked out of the house. I felt lightheaded, disconnected from the ground beneath my feet. I got into my car, threw the camera bag on the passenger seat, and just sat there. My phone buzzed. It was an automated email from my landlord reminding me that rent was due in 3 days. I had $8.14. I started the car, but I didn't know where to go. The world had tilted on its axis. The people who were supposed to protect me had eaten me alive, and they had done it over coffee and croissants. I put the car in reverse, backing out of the driveway of the house that had been bought with lies, leaving my future behind on their kitchen counter. I walked into the Bayfield Crossings Police Department with a naive belief in the black and white nature of the law. I thought that theft was theft, regardless of whose DNA you shared or whose dinner table you sat at. I was clutching a plastic folder containing my bank statements, the transaction list from Gems of Bayfield, and the printout of my decimated savings account. I had spent an hour highlighting the fraudulent charges in yellow marker, convinced that if I just made it easy for them to see, they would fix it. The front desk officer was a heavy-set man with a mustache that looked like it had given up years ago. He listened to me for exactly 3 minutes. He nodded as I explained the unauthorized transactions. He frowned when I mentioned the amount, $12,000. But the moment the words mother and stepfather left my mouth, the air in the room changed. The professional interest drained from his face, replaced by a weary, condescending patience. He stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "It sounds like a domestic financial disagreement, Miss Collins," he said. I stared at him. Disagreement. I slammed my hand onto the counter, the sound echoing in the quiet lobby. "They stole my life savings. They took my card without permission and bought a watch and went to a spa. That is not a disagreement. That is grand larceny." He sighed, reaching for a different form than the one he had started. "Look, you lived in the house, right? You have a history of shared expenses. The bank says the PIN was used. That implies access was granted. We see this all the time. Kids lend cards to parents. Parents lend cards to kids. Someone spends more than they agreed on, and then they come here wanting us to be the referee. This is a civil matter. You need to take them to small claims court." I tried to argue. I told him I didn't live there anymore. I told him about the threat Caleb had made. The officer just shook his head and handed me a slip of paper about the size of a receipt. It had a number scrawled on it. "This is an incident report number," he said, "for your records. But I'm telling you right now, no detective is going to pick this up. The district attorney doesn't prosecute family disputes over debit cards. It is a waste of taxpayer money to get involved in a," he said. She said, "situation at the dinner table." I walked out of the station holding that useless slip of paper like it was a death certificate. It was an incident report, destined for a digital graveyard, a file that would never be opened, never investigated, and never solved. The system had looked at a crime and decided that because it happened within a family, it didn't count. I sat in my car in the police station parking lot and called Northlock Community Bank again. I gave them the incident report number, my voice trembling with a desperate hope that this magic number would unlock their empathy. The fraud specialist on the other end was even colder than the first one. "We have reviewed the notes, Miss Collins," she said. "A police information report is not a proof of fraud. It is just a record that you spoke to the police. Our investigation stands. The chip was present. The PIN was used. We have determined this is a civil dispute between known parties. We will not be crediting the $12,000 back to your account." She hung up before I could scream. I drove home in a daze. The gas light on my dashboard pinged, a cheerful little chime warning me that I had less than 20 miles of range left. I ignored it. I went back to my apartment, sat on the floor, and opened my laptop. A terrifying thought had taken root in my mind. If they had my debit card, what else did they have? I logged into a credit monitoring site. My fingers felt heavy, like they were moving through water. I typed in my social security number and hit enter. The screen refreshed, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. My credit score, which had been a proud 740 just last month, was now 520. A red arrow pointed down, a graphic representation of my life collapsing. I scrolled down to the new account section, and I physically retched. There were 3 new lines of credit opened in the last 30 days. One was a credit card from a major issuer, maxed out at $5,000. The transaction history showed airline tickets to Miami and hotel bookings. The second was another credit card, this one for an electronics store, with a balance of $3,000. The third was the one that killed me. It was an online personal loan from a company called Lighthouse Advance, known for high interest rates and predatory terms. The loan amount was $15,000. The status was disbursed. The funds had been sent to an account I didn't recognize. I did the math in my head. $12,000 from my savings, $5,000 on the first card, $3,000 on the second, $15,000 on the loan. They hadn't just stolen my past earnings. They had stolen my future credit. They had leveraged my identity to secure $35,000 in spending money, and they had done it systematically, over weeks, while looking me in the eye and talking about God. My phone rang. It was a local number. I answered it, thinking maybe, just maybe. It was the police calling back to say they had made a mistake. It was a loan officer from Cedarline Co-op Credit. I had applied for a small business loan 2 weeks ago to upgrade my camera body and buy a specific portrait lens. It was a modest loan, $4,000, and based on my previous credit score, it had been a sure thing. "Miss Collins?" the officer said, sounding awkward. "I am afraid we have to rescind our preliminary approval. We pulled your final credit report this morning to process the paperwork, and there has been a significant change in your debt-to-income ratio. Your score has dropped below our threshold. We cannot move forward." I didn't argue. I just hung up. Then the second wave hit, the professional fallout. Caleb had promised to destroy my reputation if I went to the police. I hadn't even successfully filed a criminal report. But he wasn't taking any chances. He had launched a preemptive strike. My email pinged. It was from the marketing director at Iron Birch Collective. My hands shook as I opened it. Subject contract pause. Touching base. "Hi, Chloe. We are writing to let you know that we need to press pause on the upcoming holiday lifestyle campaign. We have been hearing some concerning things through our community channels regarding some personal struggles you might be navigating right now. At Iron Birch, we value stability and family integrity above all else. We feel it is best to take a step back and let you focus on your health. We will be in touch if things change in the new year. Best, David." It was polite. It was corporate. It was lethal. Caleb had made the call. He had poisoned the well. Within 2 hours, 2 of my smaller wedding clients sent terse emails canceling their bookings, citing unforeseen changes in plans and asking for their deposits back. I didn't have the deposits. The deposits were in the savings account that Sandra had emptied to buy a watch. I was sitting in the ruin of my career when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an old friend from the church youth group, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Chloe, I am so sorry you are going through this. We are all praying for your healing." I frowned. Healing. Then she sent a screenshot. It was an email, a mass email. The subject line was Prayers for Our Daughter Chloe. It had been sent from Sandra's personal account, but the signature block included Caleb's pastoral title. It had been sent to the entire church directory, the neighborhood association list, and our extended family. Dear friends and family, it is with a heavy heart that we ask for your prayers. Our daughter Chloe is currently battling a severe mental health crisis. The enemy is attacking her mind, causing her to suffer from delusions and paranoia, particularly regarding finances. She has been making wild, hurtful accusations against us and others, claiming theft and persecution where there is only love. We are working with professionals to get her the help she needs. In the meantime, if she reaches out to you with these frantic stories, please do not engage. It only feeds the delusion. Please just pray for her clarity and peace. We love her and are standing by her during this dark season. In His grace. Sandra and Pastor Caleb. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. It was brilliant. It was evil. It inoculated them against everything I could say. If I showed people the bank statements now, they would look at me with pity and see a crazy girl waving papers, just like her mother warned. Any attempt to defend myself would be seen as a symptom of the crisis. The isolation was immediate and suffocating. I walked down the hall to the laundry room later that afternoon, and my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who usually stopped to ask about my photography, saw me coming. She immediately looked down at her basket and hurried inside her apartment, locking the door audibly. She had received the email. I was the crazy girl in 3B now. When I got back to my door, there was a piece of paper taped to it. It was a pay or quit notice. My landlord, who attended New Dawn Fellowship, hadn't even called. He had seen the email, checked his ledger, saw I was 3 days late on rent because I had no money and decided to cut his losses. I had 5 days to pay $800 or get out. I went into my apartment and closed the door. I checked my wallet. I had $3 bills and some quarters. My car had a quarter tank of gas. My refrigerator had half a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of stale bread. I needed money, not career money, not future money. I needed now money. I needed cash to buy gas to get to a job interview, cash to buy ramen noodles, cash to keep the lights on. I opened the local classifieds on my laptop, scrolling past the jobs that required background checks or 2 weeks to process payroll. I needed cash today. I saw the ad, daily labor, cash pay, wholesale flour sales, must have own vehicle, report to the warehouse at 4:00 a.m. The next morning, at 4 o'clock, I drove my Honda to a grimy warehouse district on the south side of the city. The air smelled of diesel and rotting stems. A man with a clipboard looked at my car, looked at me, and handed me a plastic bucket and an armful of cheap, dying carnations. You get the intersection at Ridgeway and Dalton. He grunted. You sell them for $5 a bunch. You keep $2 for every bunch you sell. If you don't sell at least 10 bunches, don't come back tomorrow. I took the bucket for the next 3 weeks. That was my life. I stood on the concrete median, inhaling exhaust fumes, watching people I used to know drive by in their warm cars. I pulled my hood down low. I wore sunglasses even when it was raining. The humiliation was a physical weight, heavy as the bucket in my hand. I was a college graduate. I was a business owner. And now I was the girl selling flowers to people who pitied me. But something changed in me during those weeks on the median. Every evening, I would come back to my apartment, which I was clinging to by paying the landlord in inconsistent wads of cash, and I would empty my pockets. I would smooth out the crumpled dollar bills, and then I would open a folder. It was a cheap, yellow manila folder. I started putting everything in it: the receipt from the gas station where I bought a coffee, the printout of the prayers for Chloe email, the eviction notice, the rejection letter from the loan company, the incident report from the police, the credit report showing the $15,000 loan. Caleb had told me that my income would be collateral damage. He had told me that no one would believe me. He was right about the people, but he was wrong about the paper. I remembered what he said about the police report being a civil matter. I remembered the bank telling me that the PIN was proof of authorization. The world ran on documentation. The world didn't care about my feelings or my truth, or my tears. It cared about what was written down. So I kept it all. I became a hoarder of evidence. I took screenshots of texts where cousins told me they couldn't talk to me anymore. I saved the voicemails where Sandra left weeping. Manipulative messages asking if I was taking my meds. I printed the logs of every time Iron Birch Collective visited my LinkedIn profile after firing me. I sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating peanut butter from a spoon, staring at the growing pile of documents in the folder. I wasn't crazy. The papers proved I wasn't crazy. The papers proved that I was being systematically dismantled by two people who were currently planning a vacation to San Aurelio on my credit. I touched the edges of the bank statement where the negative balance was highlighted in yellow. Paper is the only thing that doesn't call you crazy, I whispered to the empty room. I closed the folder. I set my alarm for 3:30 in the morning. I had flowers to sell. I had to survive long enough to figure out how to use this paper to cut their throats before they finished cutting mine. I didn't call a lawyer. Lawyers cost $300 an hour, and I currently had about $40 in crumpled bills and a pocket full of change. I didn't call a priest, because the man who robbed me was currently standing in a pulpit every Sunday. Instead, I called Naomi Ellis. We had met sophomore year of college. While I was trying to capture the soul of the campus in black and white film, Naomi was double majoring in statistics and behavioral economics. She now worked for a firm called Ridgepoint Metrics, doing things with data that sounded boring until you realized she was essentially predicting the future for Fortune 500 companies. Naomi didn't do drama. She didn't do pity, she optimized. I called her from the front seat of my freezing car at 3:30 in the morning, just before I had to clock in for my shift at the intersection. I told her everything. I didn't cry, mostly because I was too dehydrated from stress. But I laid it out: the bank account, the watch, the spa, the mass email, the eviction notice. There was a silence on the line that lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Send me your location," she said. Her voice was crisp, devoid of the sympathetic cooing I had been dreading. "I am coming to get you." "I can't," I said, staring at the bucket of carnations in the passenger seat. "I have to work. If I don't sell 10 bunches today, I lose the spot. I will be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. She arrived at the intersection of Ridgeway and Dalton at 6:45. I was shivering on the median, trying to avoid eye contact with a truck driver who was honking at me. Naomi's car, a silver hybrid that was kept impeccably clean, pulled up to the curb. She rolled down the window. She didn't look at me with sadness. She looked at me like I was a dataset that had been corrupted and needed a patch. "Get in," she said. "I can't," I said, gesturing to the bucket. "I have product." Naomi got out of the car. She was wearing a tailored blazer and running shoes, the uniform of a woman who had places to be. She walked over to me, took the entire bucket of dying carnations out of my hand, and marched over to a trash can on the corner. She dumped them in. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a $50 bill, and stuffed it into the pocket of my hoodie. "That covers your quota," she said. "Now get in the car." I got in. The heater was running, and it felt like heaven. Naomi merged into traffic, her hands steady on the wheel. "We are going to my apartment," she said. "We are going to get coffee, and then we are going to stop acting like a victim." "But they destroyed me." "Naomi," I whispered, the heat of the car finally thawing the numbness in my chest. "They took everything. They told everyone I am crazy." Naomi glanced at me, her expression hard. "They didn't take everything," she corrected. "They took your money and your reputation. Those are recoverable assets. But you are wasting energy trying to argue with people who are operating on a different logic system. You are trying to use emotion to fight an algorithm. You are done arguing. Chloe, from now on, you collect." Naomi's apartment was like her mind minimalist, expensive, and terrifyingly organized. There was a white glass desk, 2 monitors, and a view of the city that made everything look small and manageable. She sat me down and placed a mug of black coffee in front of me. Then she opened a laptop and created a new spreadsheet. She typed a header in bold. Size 14 font, Monroe Ledger. She created 3 tabs: timeline, victims, documentation.
Okay, she said, cracking her knuckles. Empty your pockets. Everything you have saved. Every receipt. Every scrap of paper. I pulled out my folder. The eviction notice. The transaction list. The incident report number. Naomi didn't just look at them. She scanned them into the computer immediately. Now, she said, pointing to my camera bag. You are a photographer. Use your tool. I blinked. What document the scene? She said. If this were a car crash, you would be taking photos of the skid marks. This is a financial crash. Take a picture of your empty wallet. Take a screenshot of your bank app showing the negative balance. Take a picture of the text messages your mother sent you. I hesitated, then pulled out my camera. It felt heavy, familiar. I set the aperture. I took a photo of the eviction notice taped to the table. The harsh morning light hit the orange paper, making the black letters scream, "Pay or quit."
I took a photo of my bank app on my phone screen, the red numbers sharp and focused. I took a photo of the prayers for Chloe email. Zooming in on the line where they called me delusional, it felt strange, turning my lens on my own disaster. But as the shutter clicked, I felt a tiny shift. I wasn't just suffering anymore. I was observing. I was documenting. Naomi watched me, nodding. Good. Now we build the data set. You said Caleb threatened you. You said Sandra claimed she was borrowing money. People like this don't start with a $12,000 theft. That is the escalation. That is the finale. They have been practicing on smaller targets for years. She turned the monitor toward me. Who else? Who else, what I asked? Who else have they hit? Naomi asked. Think, family, friends, congregation members. Who has disappeared? Who did Sandra suddenly stop talking to? Who did Caleb have a falling out with over theological differences? I stared at the cursor blinking in the victims column. My cousin Logan, I said slowly. He is an architect in Chicago. He used to be close with Mom. Then about 2 years ago, he just stopped coming to holidays. Mom said he had become worldly and selfish. Call him, Naomi said. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Logan's name. I hadn't spoken to him in 18 months. He answered on the third ring, sounding wary. Chloe, I got an email from your mom. Look, if this is about money, it is about money. I cut in, my voice shaking slightly. But I'm not asking for it. I am asking if they took it from you. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Logan sighed, a sound of deep, exhausted resignation. $5,000, he said. 2 years ago, Caleb called me. He was crying. He said he had a heart arrhythmia, and the insurance deductible was $5,000, and they were short until the end of the month. He said he didn't want to worry Sandra. So could I wire it directly to him? I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Did he have a heart condition? He was playing tennis 3 days later, Logan said, his voice hardening. When I asked for the money back a month later, Sandra called me. She told me I was putting undue stress on a sick man. She told me that if I really loved family, I wouldn't be counting pennies while Caleb was fighting for his life. She made me feel like a monster for asking for my own money. Naomi was typing furiously. Name Logan Monroe. Amount $5,000. Pretext, medical emergency. Fallout. Guilt trip. Estrangement. I have the wire transfer receipt, Logan added. I kept it because, I don't know why, I guess because it annoyed me. Send it to me. I said, please, Logan, send it to me right now. When I hung up, Naomi pointed to the screen. Next, I called my older sister, Molly. We were even more estranged. Molly had moved 3 states away 5 years ago and barely spoke to us. I always thought she just hated the church atmosphere. She picked up, and I didn't waste time. Molly, did Mom and Caleb ever steal from you? I heard a sharp intake of breath. Is this a joke, she asked. No, I said. They took $12,000 from my studio fund. They bought a watch and went to a spa. Molly laughed. But it was a brittle, jagged sound. A watch. That is classic. For me, it was the caterer. Tell me, I said, putting her on speaker so Naomi could hear. It was right before my wedding, Molly said. Mom insisted on handling the catering contract. She said she could get a ministry discount because she knew the owner. I gave her $10,000 in cash money Mark and I had saved for 2 years. 2 weeks before the wedding, the caterer called me. They hadn't received a dime. My jaw dropped. What did she do with it? She told me she had to use it for a faith vacation because Caleb was burning out and needed to reconnect with God, or he might resign from the church, Molly said, her voice dripping with old acid. She said God told her that my marriage would be blessed if I started it with an act of charity toward my parents. When I screamed at her, she told the whole family I was a bridezilla who cared more about fancy food than my father's mental health. Naomi typed, "Name Molly Riker, amount $10,000. Pretext, wedding coordination/ministry burnout. Fallout character assassination." We sat there for 4 hours. We called an aunt who had invested $3,000 in a Christian business seminar. Caleb was supposedly running a seminar that never happened. We called a former neighbor who had lent Sandra $2,000 for emergency car repairs so she could visit a sick relative who didn't exist. Patterns began to emerge on the screen. It was like watching a photograph develop in the darkroom, the vague shadows sharpening into clear, undeniable lines. They always struck during vulnerable life moments: a wedding, a new job, a medical scare. They used urgency as a weapon. We need it today. The doctor needs the check now. The venue will cancel by noon. And the aftermath was always the same. If you asked for repayment, you were attacking the church. You were attacking their health. You were unstable. You were selfish. You were crazy. Naomi sat back, looking at the spreadsheet. She created a new group chat on an encrypted messaging app. She named it Recovery Ledger. Riker Monroe. It was bland. It looked like a boring accounting file. If Sandra saw a notification for that on anyone's phone, she wouldn't look twice. Naomi sent invite links to Logan, to Molly, to the aunt, to the neighbor. "I am inviting them to a workspace," Naomi explained. "I want them to upload their receipts, their bank statements, their emails. We need raw data." As the notifications started rolling in, people joining, hesitant at first, then angry. Naomi started summing the columns. She highlighted the total cell in the bottom right corner. "Look at this number." "Chloe," she said quietly. I looked. $122,450. That was the sum of the theft we had uncovered in one afternoon. And that was just family. That was just the people we knew to call. "This isn't a mistake," Naomi said, her eyes cold and focused behind her glasses. "This isn't a couple of bad financial decisions. This isn't borrowing." She tapped the screen. "This is an operation," she said. "They are running a business. And the business is you." I looked at the number again. $120,000. That was houses. That was college tuitions. That was retirements. And suddenly, the shame I had been carrying, the shame of the orange eviction notice, the shame of the flower bucket evaporated. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. I picked up my camera and took a picture of the screen. "What are you doing?" Naomi asked. "Building the ledger," I said. I looked at the victims tab. There was one name missing. A name I had seen on a receipt 3 weeks ago. A name that was supposedly dead to us. "Do you think we can find a phone number for a man named Rowan Kingsley?" I asked. Naomi typed the name into a search bar. She hit enter. "Kingsley Steelworks," she read. "Kingsley Foundry Group. Net worth estimated in the..." "Oh," she looked at me. "He is not just a victim. Chloe," she said, "he is a whale. Find him." I said. Naomi smiled. A small, sharp expression. "I am already on it." We sat in the glow of the monitors as the sun went down over Bayfield crossings. I wasn't the girl on the median anymore. I was part of the operation now. But I wasn't the product. I was the audit. We sat in Naomi's apartment for 12 hours straight. The sun had gone down, plunging the skyline of Bayfield crossings into a grid of amber streetlights. But inside, the only light came from the blue glow of 3 monitors. The air conditioner hummed a low, artificial drone that sounded like the inside of a server room. We had moved past the emotional phase of the evening. We were now in the forensic phase. Naomi was typing with a rhythm that was almost musical, her eyes darting between open databases. She had access to public record aggregators that most people didn't even know existed, tools she used at Ridgepoint Metrics to vet corporate mergers, now repurposed to dissect my stepfather. I was expecting to find a second mortgage, Naomi said, her voice flat. Or maybe a lien on their cars. That is the standard pattern for people living beyond their means. They borrow against their assets until the assets are underwater. She hit the enter key with a decisive snap. But Caleb and Sandra aren't just living beyond their means. Chloe. They are corporate entities. She swiveled the monitor toward me. On the screen were 2 filing documents from the Secretary of State's business registry. Look at the address. Naomi pointed. I leaned in. 34 Maple Crest Drive. My parents' house. Registered to that address were 2 limited liability companies. The first was named Bright Anchor Missions. It was registered as a non-profit religious outreach organization. The filing date was 6 years ago. The second was named Copper Lantern Consulting. It was registered as a for-profit logistics and donor services firm. The filing date was exactly 3 days after the first one. On paper, these are 2 totally separate entities, Naomi explained, tracing the lines on the screen with a manicured fingernail. Bright Anchor is a charity. It pays no taxes. It exists, theoretically, to collect money for God. Copper Lantern is a business. It exists to make a profit. And look who the registered agent is for both. Caleb Riker. I felt a cold prickle of unease on the back of my neck. Why do they need a consulting firm? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She opened a new window and started overlaying the tax filings for Bright Anchor, which were public because of its non-profit status, against the few credit reports she could pull while she worked. A notification pinged on my laptop. It was from the Recovery Ledger group we had started only hours ago. It was a message from Marjorie Pike. I knew the name instantly. Marjorie had been the treasurer at New Dawn Fellowship for 20 years. She was a woman who wore sensible shoes, carried a calculator in her purse, and treated the church budget with more reverence than the scripture itself. 2 years ago, she had abruptly retired to move to Arizona, or so the official announcement had said. I am glad someone is finally asking. Marjorie's message read, I didn't retire. Chloe, I was pushed out. I typed back quickly. What happened? Marjorie. Her reply came in paragraphs, fast and angry. I started noticing checks coming in from the older congregants. Big checks, $5,000, $10,000, estate gifts, but they weren't written to New Dawn Fellowship. They were written to Bright Anchor Missions. When I asked Caleb about it, he told me it was a specific fund for international outreach that needed separate accounting to protect the church's liability. I looked at Naomi. She was reading over my shoulder. Keep reading, Naomi whispered. Marjorie continued. It seemed odd, but not illegal. Until I saw the outgoing expenses, Bright Anchor was taking in these donations, tax-free, and then immediately writing checks for consulting fees to a vendor I had never heard of, Copper Lantern Consulting. They were billing the nonprofit for travel coordination, donor cultivation, and impact reporting. The invoices were vague: $4,000 for logistical support, $6,000 for vision planning. Naomi slammed her hand on the desk. That is the wash, she shouted, startling me. It is a classic pass-through. She grabbed a notepad and drew a diagram. Here is the donor, she said, drawing a stick figure. Let's say it is Mrs. Higgins from the choir. She writes a check for $10,000 to Bright Anchor, thinking she is building an orphanage in Brazil. She drew an arrow to a box labeled Bright Anchor. The money lands here. It is tax-deductible for Mrs. Higgins. It looks like a charitable gift. But Bright Anchor doesn't build an orphanage. Bright Anchor hires Copper Lantern Consulting to plan the orphanage. She drew an arrow to a second box labeled Copper Lantern. Bright Anchor pays Copper Lantern $9,000 for consulting fees. Now the money is in a private, for-profit business account controlled by Caleb and Sandra. Once it is in Copper Lantern, it is just business revenue. They can pay themselves salaries. They can buy company vehicles. They can pay for business travel. I felt sick. The watch, the spa, The luggage? I pulled up the transaction list from my stolen debit card again. Lux Luggage Leather, Sanctuary Springs Spa, Naomi, I said, my voice trembling. Look at the dates on Marjorie's timeline. Marjorie had uploaded a photo of an old ledger page she had kept. October 14th, check to Copper Lantern for $3,500. I checked my credit report. October 15th, payment on Chase Sapphire card for $3,500. They were using the donations to pay off their personal credit cards, I realized. But when the donations slowed down, Naomi finished for me, her voice grim. They needed a new source of liquidity to keep the machine running. That is when they hit you. That is when they hit Logan. That is when they hit the cousins. You weren't a daughter to them, Chloe. You were just a gap in the cash flow that needed to be plugged. I stared at the screen. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My $12,000 wasn't just stolen to buy a watch. It was stolen to feed a beast that had been eating for years. My savings had been tossed into a furnace that burned through retirement funds and widow's mites without hesitation. But where is it going, I asked. They spend a lot. Sure, but Marjorie is talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over 5 years. They have a nice house, but they don't have a yacht. They don't have a vacation home. Naomi narrowed her eyes. That is the right question. She went back to the public records search. She started digging into the UCC filings for Copper Lantern Consulting. These were filings made when a business took out a loan or moved large assets. She found a wire transfer record attached to a secured business loan application Caleb had filed 6 months ago. He had listed an offshore asset as collateral to secure a local line of credit, Valmaris Bank. Naomi froze. She stopped typing. She turned to look at me, and for the first time since she picked me up at the intersection, she looked genuinely rattled. Do you know what Valmaris Bank is? She asked. I shook my head. It is in Arcadia Cay, she said. It is a micronation in the Caribbean. It is basically a rock with an airstrip and a server farm. They are famous for 2 things: absolute banking secrecy. They don't share data with the IRS, unless there is a literal terrorism warrant and the fact that they have no extradition treaty with the United States for white-collar crimes. She pulled up a map. Arcadia Cay was a tiny speck of green in a sea of blue. Chloe, she said quietly, people don't bank in Arcadia Cay because they are saving for a rainy day. They bank there because they are planning to leave. I thought about the breakfast table. The brochure Caleb was reading. San Aurelio. San Aurelio isn't in Arcadia Cay, I said. It is in Central America. Naomi typed San Aurelio into the search bar. It is a protectorate, she read. It has a direct ferry link to Arcadia Cay. It is a 40-minute boat ride. The pieces clicked together with a terrifying sound like a lock snapping shut. The mission trip, the revival. It wasn't a trip. It was a relocation. They are running, I whispered. They are going to drain everything they can me, the family, the church, and then they are going to get on a plane to San Aurelio, take a boat to their money in Arcadia Cay, and disappear. Naomi began setting up alerts. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. I am flagging every public filing for Bright Anchor and Copper Lantern, she said. If they file a permit, I want to know. If they change a registered agent, I want to know. She paused. Who else is left? Who is the biggest pot of money they haven't touched yet? My blood ran cold. Grandma, I said. Eleanor Monroe. Does she have money? Naomi asked. She owns her house outright. I said. It is a historic Victorian in the Old Hill District. It is worth at least $600,000, and she has a grandfathered pension from the steel mills. Naomi typed Eleanor Monroe into the alert system. If they are cashing out, Naomi said. The house is the final liquidation. We have to watch her like a hawk. I sat back, my head spinning. I looked through the digital files on my hard drive, needing to look at something familiar, something that wasn't a spreadsheet of crimes. I opened a folder of scanned family photos I had digitized years ago for a slideshow at my aunt's 50th birthday. I scrolled through the images. Sandra smiling with a tight jaw at a picnic, Caleb preaching with his hands raised, me, 12 years old, looking uncomfortable in a floral dress. Then I stopped. There was a photo from 20 years ago. It was grainy, taken on an old disposable camera. It showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a factory expansion. There was a banner in the background. Kingsley Steelworks, forging the future. In the foreground, a younger, eager-looking Caleb was shaking hands with a man. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hard hat and a suit. He looked like a titan. He looked like the man in the town car, Rowan Kingsley, but it was the look on their faces that stopped me. Caleb was smiling that greasy, ingratiating smile he used on wealthy donors. He was leaning in, desperate, hungry. Rowan Kingsley was not smiling. He was looking at Caleb's hand as if it were covered in slime. He was looking at him with a mixture of disgust and profound, icy judgment. I zoomed in on Caleb's face. I saw the desperation there, the hunger to be part of that power, the hunger to be inside the circle of wealth that the Kingsley name represented. And suddenly, I understood the entire architecture of my life. Caleb hadn't just married my mother for love. He had married the daughter of Rowan Kingsley. He had thought that by marrying Sandra, he would get a key to the steel fortune. He thought he would get a seat at the table, but Rowan had seen him. He had seen the grifter in the cheap suit, and he had cut them off. He had slammed the vault door shut, denied the big fortune. Caleb had turned inward. He had looked at the women in his life, Sandra, Eleanor, and eventually, me, and realized that if he couldn't be a millionaire, he could at least be a parasite. If he couldn't have the steel money, he would strip mine us instead. I was just collateral damage in a 20-year temper tantrum thrown by a man who was told no by a billionaire. I looked at Naomi. "They aren't just thieves," I said, my voice shaking with a new, cold clarity. "They are failures, and that makes them so much more dangerous." Naomi looked at the alert she had just set for Eleanor Monroe. "Then we better hope we aren't too late for your grandmother," she said, "because failures with a deadline are the most desperate people on earth." My phone buzzed. It was an automated text from my landlord. Reminder, rent is past due. 3 days to eviction. I looked at the text. Then I looked at the photo of Rowan Kingsley. He told me that paper keeps score better than tears. I said, I grabbed my camera bag. "Naomi, how much gas is in your car?" "Full tank," she said. "Why?" "Because we need to drive to the Old Hill District." I said, "We need to go see Eleanor, and I need to take a picture of every piece of paper in her house before they burn it." Naomi grabbed her keys. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just nodded. "Let's go collect," she said. I didn't walk into Bayfield Legal Aid with hope. I walked in with a spreadsheet. The office was located in the basement of a community center that smelled vaguely of chlorine from the pool upstairs and old paper. It was a place for people who had run out of options, and I fit right in. The receptionist pointed me toward a cubicle in the back. Sitting there was Dana Schultz. She looked like she was running on 4 hours of sleep and pure caffeine. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun held together by a pencil, and her desk was a geological formation of case files. She was eating a bagel with one hand and typing with the other. "Chloe Collins," she asked without looking up. "You're the identity theft intake at 10:30. "Yes," I said, clutching my laptop bag. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a plastic chair. "You have 15 minutes. Tell me why the police won't help you." I sat down and opened my laptop. I didn't give her a sob story. I didn't tell her about the flowers or the median. I turned the screen toward her and showed her the Monroe ledger. "My mother and stepfather stole $12,000 from my savings account using a debit card they took from my purse," I said, my voice steady. "They opened $35,000 in credit in my name. They have also taken over $100,000 from other family members and church congregants through a shell company structure involving a nonprofit and a consulting firm. The police called it a civil dispute." Dana stopped chewing. She looked at the spreadsheet. She looked at the breakdown of the bright anchor to copper lantern money flow. She looked at the scan of the receipt for the $4,000 watch. She swallowed her bite of bagel and wiped her hands on a napkin. "Okay," she said. "You have more than 15 minutes." For the next hour, Dana Schultz dissected my life with the precision of a surgeon. She listened to the recording of the voicemail Sandra left me. She read the prayers for Chloe email. She looked at the transaction logs. "Here's the problem," Dana said, leaning back in her chair, her eyes sharp. "Local cops hate family fraud cases. They see mom and stepdad, and their brains shut off. They think it is just a Thanksgiving argument gone wrong. And the banks? They hide behind the PIN logs. As far as they are concerned, if the PIN was used, it is authorized. End of story." She tapped a pen against her desk. "And the church? They will close ranks. They will protect the pastor because protecting him protects the institution. You can't win in the court of public opinion. Chloe, you can't outcry your parents." I felt a familiar sinking feeling. "So there is nothing I can do." "I didn't say that," Dana said, a small, dangerous smile appearing on her face. "I said you can't win with feelings, but tax authorities, they don't have feelings. Elder abuse units, they don't care about prayer circles, they care about math." She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. "I am taking this case pro bono, not because I feel sorry for you, though I do, but because this spreadsheet is the most beautiful map of a RICO predicate I have seen in 6 months. "RICO?" I asked. "Like the mob." "Like organized fraud," Dana corrected. "We are going to pivot. We aren't chasing them for being bad parents. We are chasing them for identity theft and elder financial abuse. We have to out-document them." She started typing a letter on her computer, the keys clacking loudly. "First, we send formal cease and desist letters to Sandra and Caleb. We put them on notice. Then, we send demand letters to Northlock Community Bank and Lighthouse Advance. We are going to formally dispute these debts under the Fair Credit Billing Act and the Electronic Fund Transfer Act. We are going to create a paper trail that proves you are fighting this, not just whining about it." She hit print. The printer in the corner whirred to life. "But be warned," Dana said, handing me the letters to sign. "The lenders will double down. They will say it was authorized. They won't budge until we show them a criminal indictment. This is going to get worse before it gets better. We need to get someone bigger than the Bayfield PD involved." She picked up her phone. "I am calling Mac." "Who is Mac?" I asked. "Mac Rivera?" she said, dialing. "He is a retired fraud investigator. He used to work for the state insurance commissioner. He treats spreadsheets like crime scenes. If anyone can find the smoking gun in that mess of LLCs, it is him." Mac Rivera met us at a diner 2 hours later. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of teak wood, weathered, tough, and utterly unshakable. He wore a polo shirt and reading glasses that hung around his neck on a cord. He didn't say hello, he just sat down, opened his laptop, and asked for the file. I transferred the Monroe ledger to him. Mac spent 20 minutes scrolling through the data Naomi and I had compiled. He looked at the donations to Bright Anchor. He looked at the payments to Copper Lantern. He looked at the wire transfers to the offshore entity. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You have a problem, Miss Collins," Mac said, his voice gravelly and low. "But your parents have a bigger one." "What do you mean?" I asked. Mac turned his laptop around. He had run a quick pivot table on the data. "I am looking at the declared income for a nonprofit of this size versus the outflows to the consulting firm," Mac explained. "Over the last 5 years, the undeclared income and siphoned funds easily exceed $150,000. That is a conservative estimate." He looked me in the eye. "That is enough to interest the state attorney general. And it is certainly enough to interest the IRS Criminal Investigation Division." He leaned forward. "See, you are looking at this as they stole my money, and they did. But you aren't the only victim here. The United States Treasury is a victim. When they use a nonprofit to funnel tax-free donations into a for-profit shell company to buy watches and spa days, that is tax evasion. That is money laundering." He pointed a thick finger at the screen. "They stole from you. They stole from your cousins. They stole from the elderly. And they stole from the government. That is what makes this federal. That is what gets you past the bored cop at the front desk." I felt a shiver go down my spine. Federal. That word had a weight to it. It sounded like prison. It sounded like justice. So what do we do? I asked. We build a packet, Mac said. We don't give them scraps. We give them a finished case. We need one more thing. Though, we have the numbers. We have the paper trail. We need the intent. We need them to admit they know what they are doing. Dana looked up from her coffee. Bayfield is in a one-party consent state, she said. I looked at her. What does that mean? It means, Dana said, that you can legally record a conversation without the other person's permission. As long as you are part of the conversation, you don't have to tell them. You just have to be in the room. She looked at me intensely. If you can get Sandra or Caleb to admit that the money wasn't a gift, or that they control the offshore account, or that they are planning to leave, that is the nail in the coffin. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a notification. New email from Sandra Monroe. I froze. Speak of the devil, I whispered. I opened the email. Dana and Mac leaned in to read it. Subject: let's talk. Honey Chloe, I know things have been heated. Your father and I are so heartbroken over this misunderstanding. We hate that we have let money come between family. We want to make this right. Please, let's meet for coffee. Just us girls. No lawyers. No drama. Let's just sit down and heal this family. I have a proposal that I think will help you feel better about everything. Love, Mom. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to reply, to say yes. A part of me, the part that was still a little girl who wanted her mother to love her, thought maybe she really did want to fix it. Maybe she would give the money back. She wants to settle, I said. Maybe she realizes they went too far. Dana laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. Chloe, look at the timestamp. She sent this 2 hours after she would have received my cease and desist letter. She isn't writing this because she misses you. She is writing this because she is terrified. She wants to get you in a room without counsel, Mac added. She wants to manipulate you into signing something, or admitting that the money was a loan, or just to gauge how much you really know. This is a reconnaissance mission. So I shouldn't go, I asked. Oh, you are definitely going, Dana said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, discreet device. It looked like a USB drive. This is a high-fidelity voice recorder, she said. It has a 12-hour battery life. It clips onto a bra strap or the inside of a pocket. She slid it across the table to me. You aren't going to coffee to make up, Dana said, her voice hard. You aren't going to heal the family. You are going to collect evidence. You are going to let her talk. You are going to play the confused, hurt daughter, and you are going to get her to hang herself with her own words. I picked up the recorder. It was cold and metal. It felt heavy in my hand. One-party consent, I whispered. Exactly, Mac said. You are the party, and you consent. I looked at the email again. No lawyers, just coffee. Okay, I said. I will do it. Good, Dana said. Now, let's script this out. We need to trap her. We need to make her think she's winning so she gets sloppy. We spent the next hour planning the conversation like a military operation. Mac told me exactly what questions to ask to trigger her. Dana told me how to react if she started crying. When I left the diner, the sun was setting. I walked back to my car. The recorder in my pocket. I felt different. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an operative. I was a wire. And tomorrow morning, over lattes and false apologies, I was going to bring the whole house of cards down to make sure the recording was clean. I had to become a seamstress for an evening. I sat on the floor of my apartment with a needle, thread, and a patterned silk scarf I'd bought at a thrift store for $4. The recorder Dana gave me was small, about the size of a pack of gum, but it still had weight. If I just clipped it to my bra strap, the microphone might rub against the fabric of my blouse and create a scratching noise that would drown out the voices. I needed a buffer. I folded the scarf strategically, creating a heavy pleat near the collarbone, and sewed a small pocket into the inner fold. I slid the device inside. It was invisible to the eye. but I could feel it resting against my clavicle, a cold, hard lump of potential justice. Naomi sat across from me, playing the role of the inquisitor. She had me stand up, sit down, and lean forward, listening to the audio feed through headphones to check for interference. "Don't cross your arms," Naomi commanded, holding a stopwatch. "If you cross your arms, you muffle the mic. Keep your hands on the table. Keep your posture open, and for the love of God, Chloe, do not touch your neck. It is a tell." I practiced the movements. I reached for a coffee mug. I nodded. I leaned back. "Now, let's run the script," Naomi said. "I am Sandra. I am guilt-tripping you about the wedding money. Go." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I am just confused about why the account is empty." Naomi shook her head. "Too aggressive. You are sounding like a prosecutor. You need to sound like a daughter who is off her meds. You need to sound like the fragile, broken thing they told everyone you are. Try again." I slumped my shoulders. I lowered my voice. "Mom, I don't remember agreeing to that transfer. I feel so foggy lately." Naomi nodded slowly. "Better. Make her feel safe. Make her feel superior. That is when she will slip." The next morning, the sky over Bayfield Crossings was a piercing, relentless blue. I drove to the rendezvous point, a trendy cafe called the Daily Grind on 4th Street. It was a calculated choice. It was public, it was well lit, and it was loud enough to mask the fact that I was terrified, but quiet enough for the high-fidelity microphone to pick up a conversation across a bistro table. I arrived 20 minutes early. I bought a latte I couldn't afford and didn't intend to drink. I chose a table in the corner, facing the door, the position Mac had told me to take. I wanted to see her coming before she saw me. I reached up to my scarf, feeling the small toggle switch through the silk. I slid it to the on position. A tiny vibration against my collarbone confirmed it was recording. I waited. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, right next to the recorder. I forced myself to breathe. Just sell the story. I told myself, you sold flowers to strangers. You can sell a lie to your mother. At 10 o'clock exactly. The door opened. Sandra swept in. She was wearing a soft, oatmeal-colored cardigan over a cream blouse, her signature approachable Christian mother uniform. She had done her makeup with surgical precision. Her mascara was smudge-proof, but applied lightly to suggest she hadn't slept. Her eyes were rimmed with a carefully applied red liner that simulated hours of weeping. It was a costume. She was dressed as the grieving mother of a prodigal daughter. She scanned the room, spotted me, and her face transformed. She rushed over, her arms open, bringing with her a cloud of vanilla perfume and tension. "Chloe," she breathed, wrapping me in a hug that felt like being squeezed by a boa constrictor. "Oh, honey, you look so tired." I let her hug me. I kept my arms at my sides, careful not to brush the scarf. I pulled away gently and sat down. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice thin and reedy. She sat opposite me, reaching across the table to take my hands. Her palms were warm and dry. She looked at me with a pity that made my stomach churn. "I am so glad you agreed to meet," she said, her voice a low, soothing purr. "Your father and I have been sick with worry. We know you aren't yourself right now. We know the enemy is attacking your mind." I looked down at the table. I let the silence stretch, inviting her to fill it. "We forgave you for the scene at the house," she continued, squeezing my hand. "We know you didn't mean those things. You were just exhausted. You have always been a little dramatic when you are tired. Chloe, remember when you were 7 and you cried because you lost your doll? It is just your nature." I nodded slowly. "I guess," I whispered. The numbers looked so big." "Mom, $12,000, she sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. "Honey, we have been over this," she said. "We didn't take the money. We allocated the family resources. Ministry is expensive. Caleb has to maintain an image to bring in the donors that support the community. That watch wasn't a watch. It was a tool. It shows the investors that the church is prosperous. We did it for you." Really. To build a legacy you can inherit one day. I kept my eyes on the latte foam. So, you did use the card. I just want to make sure I'm not imagining it. The bank said the PIN was used. Sandra laughed softly. Of course the PIN was used. You gave it to us. Don't you remember I didn't give it to you? I said, keeping my tone unsure. You did. She insisted. Last month. You were so stressed about your bookings dropping. You said, Mom, take whatever you need to help Dad. You don't remember because you were in such a state, Chloe. Your memory is playing tricks on you again. That is why we need to get you back into counseling with Pastor Miller. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost burned through my composure. She was rewriting reality in real time, gaslighting me with a smile. But I felt the recorder against my chest. Got you. I thought. She had just admitted to using the card and claimed I gave verbal permission that would be contradicted by the theft report and the fact that I wasn't even in the room when they took it. I took a sip of the cold coffee to hide my expression. It was time to pivot. It was time to set the first trap. I guess I have been pretty out of it, I said, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. I have just been so worried about the trip. She blinked. The trip? The mission trip? I said, to San Aurelio. Caleb mentioned it at breakfast. Her shoulders relaxed. Oh, yes, the revival. It is going to be beautiful. Chloe, we are going to save so many souls. I leaned in, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I was just looking at flights the other day, thinking maybe I could come to take photos for the mission. Sandra stiffened. Her smile froze in place. Oh, honey, I don't know. It is going to be very rugged work, not really suitable for a recovery period. I frowned, but I saw the itinerary. I said, I was looking at flights to match yours, but I got confused. Confused how she asked, her voice sharpening slightly. Well, I saw that you guys booked one-way tickets. I lied. My voice trembled perfectly, and I got scared. I thought maybe you weren't coming back. Why would you buy one-way tickets if it is just a mission trip? The air at the table changed instantly. The warmth evaporated. Sandra pulled her hands back from mine. Her eyes darted to the left, then back to me. One way she laughed, but it was a brittle, high-pitched sound. You are misinterpreting things again. Chloe, we booked a multi-leg itinerary. We are flying into San Aurelio, but we are taking a boat to a neighboring island for a donor retreat, and then flying back from a different airport. It is cheaper that way. You really shouldn't be snooping in travel logistics you don't understand. She was lying. I knew she was lying. And more importantly, the recorder knew she was lying. She had just confirmed the boat to a neighboring island. I nodded, acting relieved. Oh, okay. That makes sense. I got worried because of the bank thing. The bank thing, she snapped. We just talked about this. Not Northlock, I said. The other bank. I waited a beat. I let the ambient noise of the cafe, the grinder, the chatter, the music fill the space. Valmaris, I said. It was just a word, but to Sandra, it was a grenade. She flinched, physically flinched, as if I had slapped her across the face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving the rouge standing out like clown makeup. What did you say? She whispered. I saw an alert. I lied again, keeping my voice breezy. On Caleb's iPad, I was looking for a game for my nephew the last time I was over. I saw a notification for a wire transfer to Valmaris Bank. I looked it up. It is in the Caribbean. Right? Near where you are taking the boat. Sandra didn't look like a grieving mother anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and furious. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a hiss. You have been snooping in our accounts, she demanded. She didn't say, what is Valmaris? She didn't say, I don't know what you are talking about. She asked how I knew. I'm not snooping. Mom, I said, letting my voice break. I was just worried. Is that a ministry account? Is that where the donations go? Stop it, she hissed, looking around the cafe to see if anyone was watching. You have no right. That is confidential church financial data. You are hacking us. Is that what this is? You are committing cybercrimes against your own father. I didn't hack anything. I said, but Mom, if the money is for the mission, why is it in a bank that doesn't talk to the IRS? She slammed her hand on the table. Keep your voice down. You don't know what you are talking about. That structure was set up by legal counsel to protect the church's assets from liability. It is standard procedure. Standard procedure. She had just admitted the account existed, that it held church assets, and that she knew about the structure. Mac was going to love this. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. The bluff that Dana and I had crafted to break her completely. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't real. It was a printout of a generic tax notice I had found online, folded so the text was obscured. I didn't want to tell you this, I said, tears finally leaking from my eyes, tears of adrenaline, not sadness. But this came to my old apartment. The mailman must have forwarded it because my name is still linked to your address on some things. What is it? She asked, snatching the paper from my hand. It is from the IRS. I whispered. It is addressed to Copper Lantern Consulting. Sandra's hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. She stared at the blank back of the folded page, afraid to open it. I opened it by mistake. I said, Mom, it says they are flagging the LLC for a potential audit of recent filings. It mentions discrepancies in reported income versus lifestyle assets. I watched the blood leave her face entirely. She went gray, a sickly ashen color that made her look 20 years older. An audit, she choked out. I nodded. I was so scared. Mom, I didn't know what to do. If they audit Copper Lantern, and they see the transfers from Bright Anchor, and the watch, and my savings, I trailed off. I let the implication hang there like a guillotine blade. Sandra didn't open the paper. She crushed it in her fist. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing stares from the nearby tables. I have to go, she said. Her voice was tight, breathless. Mom, wait, I said, reaching for her hand. We haven't finished our coffee. I thought we were going to heal the family. She pulled her hand away as if I were contagious. I have to call Caleb, she muttered, her eyes unfocused, staring at the door. I have to call him. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't hug me. She turned and practically ran toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically on the tile floor. She pushed the door open and stumbled out into the bright sunlight, clutching her phone to her ear before the door even swung shut behind her. I sat there in the sudden quiet of her absence. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I looked at the untouched latte. I looked at the empty chair where she had sat. I reached up to my scarf. I felt the hard plastic of the recorder. I slid the switch to off. I pulled the device out of the hidden pocket and held it in my hand. It was small, black, and unassuming. But inside those gigabytes was the sound of Sandra Monroe admitting to unauthorized use of my card, confirming the existence of an offshore bank account, acknowledging the shell company structure, and fleeing a crime scene at the mere mention of the IRS. She thought she had come here to manage a crisis. Instead, she had just confessed to a felony. I picked up my phone and texted Dana and Naomi. I got it. She ran. The Valmares account is real, and she is terrified. I stood up, leaving the latte on the table. I walked out of the cafe and into the sunlight. The air smelled of car exhaust and roasting coffee, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't smell like despair. It smelled like leverage. I had the paper, now I had the tape, and the countdown to their flight had just accelerated. I needed to get this to Mac before Sandra and Caleb could make it to the airport. We played the recording in Naomi's living room, the digital file amplified through her high-end speakers. Sandra's voice, tinny and frantic, filled the minimalist space. We listened to the hiss of her accusation. You have been snooping in our accounts, and the sound of her chair scraping against the floor as she fled. Mac Rivera sat with his eyes closed, listening like a man enjoying a symphony. When the tape ended with the sound of the cafe door slamming, he opened his eyes and nodded once. That is it, he said. his voice low and satisfied. That is the pivot point. She didn't deny the account. She claimed proprietary knowledge of it, and then claimed you breached confidentiality. That is consciousness of guilt. And the panic, that is your flight risk lever. Dana was already typing, transcribing the audio in real time. We have them on wire fraud, she said without looking up. We have them on structuring. And now we have them on tape admitting that the offshore structure exists. But while we were celebrating the evidence, Naomi was watching the fallout. Her workstation was set up like a command center, with 3 monitors displaying live feeds from the alert systems she had rigged. The bluff I had pulled in the cafe, the lie about the IRS audit notice, had worked too well. I had lit a fire in a room full of gasoline, and now we were watching the explosion in real time. It started 45 minutes after I left the cafe. Got one, Naomi said, her finger pointing to the left screen. Caleb just logged into his retirement portfolio. He is running a simulation on early withdrawal penalties. 10 minutes later, another one, Naomi said. Sandra just listed the Heritage Chronograph watch on a local luxury resale site. She listed it for $3,000. That is a fire sale price. She wants cash, and she wants it today. I felt a sick knot in my stomach. They weren't fighting the audit. They were liquidating. He is moving fast, Mac noted, leaning over Naomi's shoulder. A guilty man doesn't wait for the letter to arrive. He packs his bags. Naomi's phone pinged. She picked it up, her face grim. They are at the bank, she said. My alert for Northlock just tripped. Sandra just swiped her access card to enter the safe deposit box vault at the main branch downtown. She is pulling the passports, I said, the realization hitting me cold. And the cash, Mac added. Whatever they have been hoarding in physical bills, they are clearing the decks. Naomi's fingers flew across the keyboard, checking travel aggregators and cross-referencing them with the credit card numbers we had identified from the Copper Lantern filings. Got it, she whispered. She spun the monitor around. There it was, a booking confirmation made 12 minutes ago. Passenger, Caleb Riker. Passenger, Sandra Riker. Origin Bayfield Crossings Regional. Destination Miami International. Connecting to Arcadia Cay via regional ferry. Departure date November 14th. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was the 5th. 9 days, I said. They aren't waiting for the mission trip, Naomi said. They bumped it up. They are running. The room went silent. The theoretical investigation had just become a countdown. We didn't have months to build a case. We had 9 days before my parents, and the hundreds of thousands of dollars they had stolen, vanished into a Caribbean jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. Dana stood up. Okay, we are done collecting. It is time to weaponize this. She grabbed a thick binder. We are calling this Project Median, she said, looking at me, because that is where they left you. For the next 6 hours, we assembled the weapon. It wasn't a gun. It was a packet. Dana and Mac worked with a terrifying efficiency. They took the cafe recording, the transcript, the Monroe Ledger spreadsheet, the flowcharts showing the money moving from the nonprofit to the consulting firm, and the wire transfer records to Valmaris Bank. They put the flight itinerary right on top. Mac wrote a cover letter. It wasn't polite. It was urgent. It used phrases like active flight risk, ongoing dissipation of assets, and predatory elder abuse. We are sending this simultaneously to 2 places, Mac explained, sealing the heavy envelopes. One goes to the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. They handle the fraud. The second one goes to a contact I have at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They handle the tax evasion. Why the IRS? I asked, because, Mac smiled grimly, you can run from a bad check, but you can't run from the Treasury. If the IRS flags their passports, they don't get on that plane. While they built the legal cage, I realized I had my own war to fight. Caleb and Sandra had destroyed my credit, but they had also destroyed my name. The prayers for Chloe email was still circulating, to half the town. I was still the unstable daughter who needed medication. If this case went public, their defense would be to paint me as a vindictive, crazy girl. I needed to be something else. I needed to be a professional. I couldn't fix my reputation by arguing on Facebook.
I had to fix it with work. I left Naomi's apartment and drove 2 hours south to Gulfway Parish. It was a rural coastal community that was slowly disappearing into the ocean due to erosion. It was bleak, gray, and dying a perfect mirror of how I felt. I spent 3 days there, sleeping in my car, eating protein bars. I photographed the ghost forests, the salt-killed trees standing like white skeletons in the marsh. I photographed the families packing up their homes as the waterline crept closer. I photographed the muddy, defiant faces of the people who refused to leave. I didn't use the Monroe photography brand that Caleb had poisoned. I created a new portfolio under the name Monroe Fieldworks. I uploaded the photo essay to a journalism platform, titling it, "The Water Comes for Everyone." It went viral locally within 24 hours. A regional newswire picked it up, then a state paper. I watched the comments roll in on my phone. They weren't talking about my mental health. They were talking about the composition, the lighting, the empathy in the lens. This photographer has an incredible eye for loss. One comment read, "Does anyone know who Monroe Fieldworks is? This is powerful stuff." Read another, "I forwarded the link to the Iron Birch Collective director who had fired me. I didn't add a message. I just sent the link. I was reclaiming my narrative. I wasn't the crazy girl. I was the witness. And if I could document the death of a coastline with this much clarity, people would have a hard time believing I was delusional about a bank statement." When I returned to Bayfield, the Recovery Ledger Group had exploded. Marjorie Pike, the former treasurer, had added 3 more names to the chat. 2 were elderly congregants, widows who had given seed money for projects that never materialized. One was a local contractor who had done renovations on the church parsonage renovations paid for by Bright Anchor and had never been paid the final $10,000. Naomi updated the spreadsheet. The total provable loss was now $212,000. It wasn't just a number anymore, it was a mountain. Mac and Naomi printed out a new visual for our case file. It was a bar graph. On the left was a small black bar representing Bright Anchor Mission's declared yearly income $24,000. On the right was a towering red bar representing the documented lifestyle expenses of Caleb and Sandra Riker over the same period luxury leases, tuition for seminars, jewelry, travel, dining. The red bar was 8 times higher than the black bar. "There is no explanation for this other than theft," Naomi said, tapping the chart. "Unless they found a pot of gold in the backyard. The math is impossible. It was time." Dana called me into the kitchen on the 8th day. We had 7 days left before the flight. "We can't wait for the Attorney General or the IRS to process the mail." Dana said, "Government wheels turn slow. We need a local stopgap. We need to freeze them here. I thought you said the local police wouldn't help." I said, "The chief won't." Dana corrected. "He plays golf with Caleb. He goes to the prayer breakfasts. If we take this to him, he will call Caleb for a friendly heads up, and they will be on a plane tonight." She pulled up a photo of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. "This is Detective Alana Greer," Dana said. "She works in the Financial Crimes Unit. She is new to Bayfield. She transferred from Chicago. She doesn't care about prayer breakfasts. She cares about forensic accounting." Mac nodded. "I vetted her. She hates elder abuse. If we walk in there with the spreadsheet, the recording, and the affidavits from the widows, she won't see a family dispute. She will see a predator. But we have to be careful," Dana warned. "Once we walk into that station, the clock stops ticking and starts sprinting. If Greer moves on them, they will know. If she doesn't get the freeze order immediately, they will run." I looked at the file labeled Project Median. I looked at the flight itinerary that said Arcadia K. "Let's go." I said, "I am done selling flowers. I am ready to sell them out." We packed the evidence into Mac's briefcase. We drove to the station in 2 cars. I felt a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't scared of Caleb anymore. I wasn't scared of Sandra. They were just people who were bad at math and worse at morality. As we walked up the steps of the police station, I checked my phone one last time. A notification from the luxury resale site popped up. Items sold heritage. Chronograph watch. Sold for $2,800. Sandra had lowered the price.
She was desperate. I put the phone in my pocket. They were cashing out. But they didn't know that I had already bought the receipt that would cost them everything. The meeting with Detective Alana Greer took place in a glass-walled office that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale donuts. It was a fishbowl, exposed to the bustling squad room. But the moment Mac Rivera closed the door, the sound cut out, leaving us in a vacuum of high-stakes silence. Mac didn't waste time with pleasantries. He didn't try to charm her. He treated the meeting like a handover between professionals. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver USB drive, sliding it across the laminate table with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 100 times in corporate boardrooms and federal offices. Detective Greer picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. She was younger than I expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a haircut that suggested she didn't have time for vanity. She looked at me, then at the drive, and gave a weary sigh. I reviewed the intake notes. "Miss Collins?" she said, her voice skeptical. "You are alleging that your parents stole $12,000 and opened credit lines in your name. Usually, we encourage families to mediate these things. A criminal record is a bell you can't unring. And often, when tempers cool, the victims want to drop the charges." She was giving me the speech, the same speech the front desk officer had given me. The "it's just a family squabble" speech. It is not a squabble. "Detective," Mac cut in, his voice like grinding stones. "And it is not just $12,000. He reached over and opened the physical file folder we had brought. He laid 3 documents on the table, spacing them out like tarot cards. The first was the flow chart showing the money moving from Bright Anchor Missions to Copper Lantern Consulting. The second was the wire transfer confirmation to Valmaris Bank in Arcadia K. The third was the flight itinerary for Caleb and Sandra Riker, departing in 9 days. Greer looked at the flow chart. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Then she looked at the wire transfer. Her eyes narrowed. Finally, she looked at the flight tickets. She went very still. "Valmaris," she asked, looking up at Mac. "They have a corporate account and a personal sub-account," Mac said, "and as you know, Arcadia K has no extradition treaty for financial crimes. If they get on that plane next week, the money is gone, and so are they." Greer picked up the flight itinerary. She stared at it for a long moment. The skepticism vanished from her face, replaced by the cold, hard look of a hunter spotting prey. "This isn't a domestic dispute," she muttered. "This is a flight risk." She stood up, grabbing the USB drive. "I need to verify the wire numbers. If these are real, I can petition for an emergency asset freeze within the hour." "They are real," I said. "We have them on tape admitting to the account." Greer looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. She nodded once. "Sit tight. I am going to see a judge." While Greer launched her assault on the criminal side, Dana was fighting a war on a second front. She had rushed to the probate court across town with a terrifying discovery Naomi had made early that morning. While we were focused on the flight, Caleb had been busy with the paperwork. He had pressured my grandmother, Eleanor, to sign what he called simplified estate documents. He told her it was to save her legal fees. In reality, it was a quitclaim deed and a revocable living trust restructuring that would have effectively funneled her $600,000 Victorian home and her investment accounts into a trust controlled solely by Caleb and Sandra. Dana stood before a probate judge, armed with affidavits from the other widows Caleb had fleeced and the evidence of the pending criminal investigation. She argued that Eleanor was the victim of undue influence and predatory financial grooming. The judge didn't hesitate. He issued an emergency protective order for Eleanor, temporarily stripping Caleb and Sandra of any power of attorney or control over her assets. He appointed a court-approved professional guardian to lock down her accounts until the dust settled. The financial pipeline from the elderly was cut, the liquidity was drying up, and the walls were closing in. 2 days later, the preliminary hearing to determine the status of the asset freeze was scheduled. I arrived at the county courthouse feeling like an imposter. I was wearing a blazer I had bought at a thrift store, trying to look like the plaintiff my lawyer said I was. But inside, I was still the girl shaking on the median. The courtroom was cavernous and smelled of lemon pledge and old wood. It was mostly empty, just a lone reporter from the Bayfield Gazette, who usually covered traffic accidents, a couple of bored law interns scrolling on their phones, and the bailiff. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking loudly on the floor. I took my seat next to Dana at the plaintiff's table. At the respondent's table, Caleb and Sandra sat with their lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my car. They looked deflated. The emergency freeze Greer had obtained meant their credit cards weren't working. Their access to the church funds was blocked. They were currently existing in a cash-only reality, and they clearly hated it. Sandra refused to look at me. She stared straight ahead, her jaw set in a rigid line of martyrdom. Caleb looked at me once, his eyes cold and dead, before whispering something to his lawyer. I glanced toward the back of the courtroom, just to check the exits. That was when I saw him. Sitting in the very back row, almost blending into the shadows, was the old man. He was wearing the same worn tweed coat he had worn in the town car. His white hair was brushed back, and his hands were resting on the handle of a cane. Rowan Kingsley. My breath caught in my throat. Why was he here? I hadn't called him. Naomi hadn't found a direct number for him. He was a ghost who had handed me $400 and a piece of advice, and now he was sitting in my hearing like a spectator at a play. The bailiff announced the judge. We all stood. The Honorable Justice Halloway took the bench, shuffling a stack of files. We are here to discuss the emergency ex parte order regarding the assets of Caleb and Sandra Riker, the judge said, his voice booming without a microphone. Mr. Sterling, you filed a motion to dismiss. Caleb's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. This entire proceeding is an ambush. My clients are pillars of the Bayfield community. Mr. Riker is a respected clergyman. Mrs. Riker runs a charitable organization. They have been targeted by a vindictive, estranged daughter who is suffering from documented mental health struggles. He gestured toward me with a dismissive hand. Miss Collins has concocted a conspiracy theory because she was cut off financially by her parents, who were simply trying to teach her responsibility. Sterling continued, to freeze the assets of a church ministry based on the rantings of an unstable young woman is a miscarriage of justice. We ask that the freeze be lifted immediately so the ministry can continue its good work. I felt the blood rush to my face, even here, in a court of law. They were using the crazy card. Dana stood up to object, but before she could speak, the court clerk leaned over and whispered something to the judge. The judge frowned. Looking at a slip of paper the clerk handed him, he adjusted his glasses and looked out into the gallery. The court notes that an interested party has requested leave to address the bench regarding the provenance of the assets in question. The judge said, Is Mr. Kingsley present? A sound escaped Sandra's throat. It was a strangled, high-pitched gasp, like someone had stepped on her neck. Caleb whipped his head around, his face losing all color. In the back row, the old man stood up. I am here, Your Honor, he said. His voice was gravel and steel, filling the room without effort. Rowan Kingsley walked down the center aisle. He moved with a slow, deliberate power. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Sandra. He walked to the gate, opened it, and stood before the judge. State your name and interest in this case for the record. The judge said, My name is Rowan Kingsley. He said, I am the founder and retired CEO of the Kingsley Foundry Group, and I am the father of the respondent, Sandra Riker, and the grandfather of the plaintiff, Chloe Collins. The reporter in the corner stopped typing and sat up straight. The name Kingsley meant something in this state. It meant industry. It meant bridges and skyscrapers. It meant power. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have not been named in these filings. Mr. Kingsley. No, Rowan said, but my money has, or rather, the lack of it. He placed a thick leather portfolio on the plaintiff's table, right next to my hand. 25 years ago, I cut all contact with my daughter and her husband. Rowan told the judge, his voice conversational but deadly. I did this because I caught Caleb Riker attempting to siphon funds from my company's employee pension fund under the guise of spiritual consulting. I didn't prosecute him then because Sandra begged me not to. She claimed he made a mistake. I simply exiled them. Sandra had her face in her hands. Caleb was staring at the table, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. I assumed that without my capital, they would be forced to earn an honest living. Rowan continued. I was wrong. It appears that when they couldn't steal from me, they decided to steal from everyone else, including my granddaughter. He opened the portfolio. I am submitting to the court the founding documents of the Kingsley Family Trust, Rowan said. Specifically, I would like to draw the court's attention to the character clause on page 42. The judge gestured for the bailiff to bring him the document. Rowan turned to me for the first time. His eyes were blue and piercing. I wrote this clause 20 years ago, Rowan said, speaking to the room but looking at me. It states that my grandchildren, Chloe and her sister, are the sole beneficiaries of my estate. However, there is a condition. They cannot access a dime of it until they demonstrate, through independent action, provable integrity and moral resilience in the face of direct familial fraud. The room went dead silent. I stared at him. He had known. He had known they would do this. He had bet his fortune on the fact that one day they would try to eat me alive, and he wanted to see if I would let them. I have been watching the respondents for 2 decades, Rowan said, pulling another file from his coat. I have a record of every solicitation letter Caleb has sent me under a fake name. I have emails promising to multiply my gifts if I invested in their shell companies. I have evidence of checks they diverted from my own charitable foundations before I caught them. He turned to the judge. This is not a family spat, Your Honor. This is a career. Caleb and Sandra Riker are not pillars of the community. They are termites. They have eaten the foundation of this family, and now they are trying to leave town before the roof collapses. Mr. Sterling, Caleb's lawyer, tried to stand up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Sit down, the judge snapped. The judge flipped through the file Rowan had presented. He looked at the dates. He looked at the amounts. He looked at the clause in the trust. He looked at Caleb Riker. Mr. Riker, the judge said, his voice dropping to a temperature that froze the air in the room. You are sitting there claiming poverty and persecution while holding tickets to a country with no extradition treaty. You have accused your daughter of mental instability while systematically draining her life savings to fund a getaway. The judge slammed the file closed. The temporary asset freeze is hereby made permanent and comprehensive, the judge ruled, his gavel hanging in the air. This includes all accounts held by Bright Anchor Missions, Copper Lantern Consulting, and any personal accounts in the names of the respondents. He turned to the bailiff. Furthermore, given the evidence of the flight itinerary and the substantial assets held in an offshore jurisdiction, the court considers the respondents an extreme flight risk. I am issuing an immediate surrender order for all passports held by Caleb and Sandra Riker. They are to be turned over to the court clerk by 5 o'clock today. No, Sandra wailed, standing up. You can't. We have a mission trip. It is for the Lord. The judge looked at her with pure disdain. If the Lord needs you in San Aurelio, Mrs. Riker, he can transport you there himself. But as far as the United States government is concerned, you are grounded. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Rowan Kingsley picked up his portfolio. He looked at me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. A small, sharp dip of his chin. The test is over. Chloe, he said quietly. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, his cane tapping a rhythm on the floor. I sat there, stunned. I looked at Caleb and Sandra. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at each other with the terrified, feral realization that the trap had snapped shut. They were broke. They were grounded. And the grandfather they thought they had outsmarted had just walked into a room and crushed them with a piece of paper he wrote 20 years ago. The flower girl from the intersection hadn't just won. She had been vindicated by the only man in the world who knew exactly what they were. The 14th of November was supposed to be the day my parents vanished. According to the itinerary, Naomi had pulled from the dark web of their browser history. They were scheduled to fly out of Bayfield Regional Airport at 6 a.m. on a connection to Miami, and from there, disappear into the humid, non-extradition fog of Arcadia K. They almost made it. At 5:15 in the morning, Caleb and Sandra Riker stood in the TSA pre-check line. They looked like any other affluent couple heading for a winter vacation. Caleb wore a linen suit and a Panama hat. Sandra wore oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her head. They were holding brand new, emergency-issued passports they had obtained the day before by claiming their originals had been destroyed in a laundry mishap, a desperate, frantic lie told to a rush service agency 3 hours away. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Alana Greer told me about it later with a grim satisfaction that I will cherish for the rest of my life. Just as Caleb handed his boarding pass to the agent, the glass partitions of the security area seemed to vibrate. Detective Greer, flanked by 2 federal agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and 3 uniformed state troopers, stepped out from the administrative office. "Caleb Riker," Greer said, her voice cutting through the morning murmur of the terminal. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering." Sandra tried to run. It was a pathetic, reflexive movement. She turned on her heel, clutching her designer carry-on, and took 2 steps toward the exit before a female trooper blocked her path. Sandra didn't scream. She just slumped, the air leaving her body as if she were a balloon that had been pricked. The real smoking gun wasn't in their hands, though it was in Caleb's leather briefcase. When they opened it in the interrogation room an hour later, they didn't just find toiletries and a Bible. They found their original passports. The ones they had sworn under penalty of perjury were destroyed, and tucked into the inner pocket was a handwritten ledger. It listed account numbers. It listed the SWIFT code for Valmaris Bank. It listed a contact in San Aurelio who specialized in expatriate relocation and asset shielding. The emergency passport stunt was the final nail in their coffin. It proved intent. It proved they had actively conspired to circumvent the court order issued by Judge Holloway. They weren't just thieves anymore. They were fugitives who hadn't managed to leave the runway. The dominoes didn't just fall after that. They shattered. By noon that day, the corporate entities that had helped destroy my life were scrambling to save their own skins. Lighthouse Advance, the predatory online lender that had given Caleb a $15,000 loan in my name without ever seeing my face, realized they were now holding a toxic asset. They were facing exposure for approving a 5-figure sum without true know-your-customer checks, a violation that could cost them their banking license. Their legal department didn't wait for a lawsuit. They sent a secure email to Dana Schultz, voiding the entire $15,000 debt. They contacted the credit bureaus directly, scrubbing the inquiry and the balance from my file as if it had never existed. My credit score shot up 150 points in a single afternoon. Northlock Community Bank was next. Faced with criminal warrants for the safe deposit boxes and a direct inquiry from the IRS regarding their oversight of the Bright Anchor accounts, they reversed their civil dispute stance with humiliating speed. The branch manager called me personally. He sounded nauseous. He informed me that the bank had completed a secondary internal review and determined that the transactions were indeed fraudulent. They permanently restored the $12,450 to my account, along with a $500 courtesy credit for the inconvenience. I stared at the balance on my phone screen. $12,950. It was just numbers on a screen, but it looked like oxygen. The board of New Dawn Fellowship released the findings of their emergency audit 3 days later. It was a bloodbath. The forensic accountants determined that more than 80% of the donations made to Bright Anchor missions over the last 5 years had been funneled directly to Copper Lantern Consulting. The mission expenses, listed on the tax forms, matched, dollar for dollar, charges for spa treatments, luxury car leases, the $4,000 watch, and the one-way tickets to Arcadia K. The social fallout was swift and brutal. The same people who had forwarded Sandra's prayers for Chloe email, the ones who had crossed the street to avoid me, were now posting furious status updates online. "Where is my money?" Sandra, one cousin, wrote. "You told me Caleb needed heart surgery." The son of an elderly donor filed an affidavit stating his mother had given $10,000 for a well in Africa that was never dug. The comments section of the church's Facebook page became a digital pillory. Sandra's narrative didn't just crumble, it was incinerated by the heat of the truth. I went to the bail hearing. I needed to see it. The courtroom was packed this time. Half the church was there. Caleb and Sandra sat at the defense table wearing orange jumpsuits. They looked small, stripped of their designer clothes, their titles, and their moral superiority. They were just two middle-aged people who had gotten caught. Their lawyer tried one last Hail Mary. "Your Honor," he argued, sweating visibly. "My clients are community servants. They have no prior criminal record. They are not a flight risk. This was a misunderstanding regarding travel documents." The prosecutor stood up. She didn't make a speech. She simply held up a plastic evidence bag containing the one-way tickets to Arcadia Cay. Then she held up the wire transfer slips to Valmaris Bank. Then she held up the police report detailing their arrest at the boarding gate with fraudulent passports. "Bail is denied." The judge ruled. Barely looking up from his notes, "The defendants will remain in custody pending trial." I watched as the bailiff pulled Caleb's hands behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs. It was the loudest sound in the room. Sandra was weeping, but nobody was handing her a tissue. I walked out of the courtroom and into the sunlight. Dana was waiting for me. "Rowan wants to see you," she said. At my office, I went to Dana's firm. Rowan Kingsley was sitting in the conference room, looking at a stack of blueprints. He didn't hug me. He didn't tell me he was proud of me. He treated me with the respect you give a peer, not a child. He slid a document across the mahogany table. "The trust is active," he said. "The character clause has been satisfied. You showed resilience. Chloe, you didn't fold." He tapped the paper. "However, I don't believe in handing young people buckets of cash to sit on. It makes them soft. This is a matching grant. I am releasing your share of the trust, but I'm also putting up an additional investment for a business venture, provided you present a transparent plan." I smiled. I reached into my bag and pulled out the sketch I had been working on since I left Gulfway Parish. I pushed it across the table. Harbor Line Row. I said, "Unit 4B. It is an old warehouse in the Arts District. It has north-facing skylights perfect for a photography studio. But it also has a loading dock and an industrial water hookup." Rowan adjusted his glasses. And I want to use the back half as a small urban flower greenhouse," I said. "I want to grow my own stock. High-end, local, sustainable. I will sell the bouquets to my photography clients and to the local markets." I looked him in the eye. I was selling dying flowers on a median to survive. I told him, "I want to sell living ones to thrive. I want to own the thing that almost broke me." Rowan looked at the sketch. He looked at the numbers I had scribbled in the margins. For the first time since I had met him, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and signed the grant line. "Transparent," he said, "sustainable, and built on your own land. Do it." 2 weeks later, I signed the lease on the warehouse. The space was cavernous and dusty, smelling of potential. I stood in the center of the concrete floor, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. This was mine, not a gift, not a loan, a conquest. On my way back to my apartment to pack the last of my boxes, I took the city bus. It was a gray, overcast afternoon. The bus rattled down Ridgeway Avenue, past the car dealerships and the fast food joints. Then, we hit the intersection at Dalton. The bus stopped at the red light. I looked out the window. The median was empty. There was no girl in a gray hoodie shivering in the cold. There was no bucket of wilting carnations. It was just a strip of concrete, cracked and stained with oil. But standing on the sidewalk, waiting to cross, was a figure in a tweed coat, Rowan Kingsley. He saw me in the window. He didn't wave. He just looked at me, held my gaze for a second, and then raised one hand. He tapped his temple with his index finger. "Use your head," he was saying. "Paper keeps score." I nodded back as the light turned green and the bus pulled away. I didn't forgive Caleb and Sandra. I would never forgive them for the terror of those mornings, for the way they made me question my own sanity, for the theft of my safety. But I wasn't going to let them be the ending of my story. They were just the antagonists in the first chapter. The intersection didn't belong to them anymore. The narrative didn't belong to them. And the money certainly didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. And I had the receipts to prove it. So, that is how I went from begging for change at a stoplight to putting the people who put me there behind bars. It wasn't about revenge, really. It was about accounting. It was about balancing the ledger. And let me tell you, there is no feeling in the world quite like looking at a spreadsheet and seeing that, finally, you are in the black. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long road from that median strip to the courtroom, but I'm glad you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe while you are working on your own business? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you believe in fighting for your own name, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay sharp, keep your receipts, and I will see you in the next one.